Hi everyone, it's me again, back with another reading wrap up. My name's Charlotte if you're new, and welcome to my February reading wrap up. How's everyone doing? How was your February? So I read 6 books in February. February's a bit of a shorter month, so I didn't actually think that I'd get to do that many, so I was really pleasantly surprised, but I read quite a lot of short books. In the year of 2024, I've decided to not set myself a reading target at all, which to be honest feels quite liberating because it will be the first year in 2 years that I haven't got a reading target. I'll pop a link to my January reading wrap up in the description box for you if you just want to play catch up, because I think we're about 12 books in so far. Could be a bit wrong with that, but that's just off the top of my head. Before we get started as well, I think I'm going to do a series either on TikTok or on YouTube of reading popular TikTok books or YouTube books and doing like quick fire reviews on them. So if you have any suggestions below, let me know. I have read quite a few Colleen Hoover books, so I won't be including them. Kind of a reading popular books so you don't have to vibe. So let me know in the comments what suggestions you have for books that you'd like me to read. Before we get into it, I've also started a new format for these monthly review videos where I've stopped giving books star ratings for now. I've had quite positive feedback about it, and to be honest, I'm enjoying reviewing books a lot more because of it. Still will be giving books a star rating over on my story graph, so if you are really keen to know what I star rate them, you can add me as a friend on there. I haven't star rated any of my books that I've read so far this year. I need to go back through and do them. Star ratings just felt too subjective for me. It was taking the enjoyment out of reviewing them. I'm such a mood reader, I'm such a vibe reader. It's just easier for me to not do it like that. So yeah, anyway, without further ado, let's get into my book reviews for February. So in February, I read 6 books, 3 physical, 1 audio and 2 digital. So it was my first month where I've read more physical than digital. Well, on par if we're counting the audio book, but I'm really pleased with myself because of that. I'm finally getting through my physical TBR in some format, although I'm not gonna lie, one of these was a library book. So the first book I read this month was a physical book, and it was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a Gothic horror, and as usual I will give you a little synopsis of the book's events. So Noemi receives a letter from her newlywed cousin begging her to come stay with her, for someone to come help her for some assistance. Noemi travels to her cousin's house, which is called the High Place, and it's deep in the Mexico countryside. Noemi lives in Mexico City, so it's quite a different setting for her. Within the High Place there are a shocking number of secrets and mysterious going-ons happening in the walls of the house. So firstly, I actually started this book in January, and it's not very long. Let's have a look at how many pages it is. 301 exactly. I took a very long time to get into this book and to finish it, but actually for once this has nothing to do with my enjoyment of the book. I found once it hit its stride, I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's got a very creepy, like lurky, insidious, sluggish vibe, and it's like really visual in its storytelling, which I just love. So I love horror books, so I don't read enough of them. There are some points where it's just downright like gross and a bit disgusting, but it's very like visceral, moist energy. What it really reminded me of, because without giving too much away, where I say it's this very like visceral, moist horror, it's very like organic, very like deep, dark, dank, moist organisms, like biology kind of vibe. And it really reminded me in that aspect of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. I think it's 7. Don't worry, the book is not that scary, because I actually think that's one of the scariest Resident Evil games, but it's that kind of like big house, lots of rotten, strange goings on. I hope that I will reach a cross section of people who have also played that game and read this book, so if you have, please let me know. Noemi is a fantastic character because she's just a socialite, fashion icon, going off to save her cousin. Love her for that. It's really hard to review without spoiling the book, but there's a wider message about colonialism and eugenics as well that's really interesting, like an undercurrent throughout the later half of the book. I really am like luxuriating and taking my time in reading books, and I've been having like 2 or 3 books on the go at the moment, so yeah, while I took a long time to read this, I really liked it. Another physical book from me, I read Beartown by Frederick Backman. This is fiction, and I will try very hard to give you a synopsis because this book is quite hard to synopsize. Beartown is a small community, isolated, like very deep within the forest. There is a common thread that hockey brings the townsfolk together. It's their life. They live, breathe, eat, sleep hockey. and the morale of the whole community is resting on the shoulders of the junior team. This is very much a small town underdog, like sports hero kind of vibe, which is not normally what I pick up. So I actually didn't mean to get this out of the library, but this has been on my TBR for ever. I saw some amazing, fantastic reviews of it, and I went into the library to pick up another book. Really struggled to find it. Felt very overwhelmed because it's been like 6 years since I've been in the library, and then this was obviously just like right at the front because it's B, Bachman, not Beartown, and I just took it even though I was quite intimidated by the length. This is just under 500 pages, so I think quite big for me to read a physical book. I usually stick around 300 pages if I can. There's something psychologically difficult about finishing this, although the text is really big, so that's fun. Straight off the bat, I will say that Beartown is much more character driven than plot driven. It's about a lot of the tiny little subtle interpersonal relationships within a small town. It spends a lot of time setting up the relationships and the complexity of the small town vibe, and it's also about the secrets that end up tearing communities and small communities and friendships and romantic relationships and other relationships apart. So my one bit of advice would be, if you're going to read this book, is stick with it. Also, I started reading it and I also like had no idea what it's about because it's a very vague blurb, and I think the cover doesn't really allude much to what happens. I must have been about 100 pages in, because the first 100 pages, this is not a spoiler, don't worry, is literally just set up of these like complex characters, their relationships, and I'm not gonna lie, a lot of stuff about hockey. It changes character perspective frequently, which I'm still not really sure if I like that about books or not. It doesn't tell you which POV you're reading from at the start of the chapter as well, so it literally just has the chapter number, which is okay, but I think it can be confusing. I think that's why it felt like slow going for me in the first 100 pages. I can hear you all being like, okay, but do you like the book? Like, is it a good book? I read the last 300 to 400 pages in one sitting without taking a break. I read for 5 hours or so. I just did not stop. Once I got to like this turning point where I was reading and I was like feeling the tension mounting, I literally read it back to back. I stayed up till like 1:30 a.m. It was pretty good. I was very hooked. I think Frederick Backman has a very distinctive writing style as well. Like, each chapter is rounded off in such a deep way. So it will be like a paragraph and then it will just be a new paragraph with maybe 1 or 2 sentences, and it will say something that's like, I don't want to say haunting. Let me read it to you, because I just opened on the random end of a chapter and it's always very poignant. Poignant's the word I'm looking for. So this isn't, not going to spoil anything, but it just says, this is like its own standalone line. David is the only person who notices him. Their eyes meet. Peter lowers his. Like, it adds this very ambient, like, you know, when it's a bit pearl clutching. It does that at the end of almost every single chapter. So like, I just went to another one and it says, never again do you find friends like the ones you have when you're 15 years old. But like, what happened before that is like really important. So it's just always a dramatic last sentence on the end of each chapter, which is just, it always makes me laugh because it becomes a bit predictable. She's scared of the darkness in the middle of the day. I will say the suspense is really, really good. Like, all throughout those first pages that you're reading, and it feels very boring and you're kind of like, why am I sticking with this? People ask me at work what I'm reading. I was being like, a book about hockey, I guess. It was like coiling tension. I was like, something's happening, something's going to happen, what's going on? And I just had this weird feeling, and then that's when I just cleared the rest of the book in one sitting. The sentence structure is just so particular. It just really sticks with me, and I can honestly see why this has so many good reviews. I can see why it's a 13 million copy best-selling author. I don't think that it's particularly complex reading, but I think it's a tough subject that provokes thought in an accessible way, and I think books like that will always be very, very popular. You know what, and I know some people slag off this author, but it's not the comparison, but it's kind of the palatableness, I don't think that's a word, but the palatableness of this book and the characters kind of reminds me of Jodi Picoult. You know, that kind of like character driven moral dilemma vibe. That's what it gives me. This book is better written, but I think Jodi Picoult really snapped with a lot of her books when we were in that era, you know. So this is a trilogy, and it's kind of set up in a way that it makes you really want to read the trilogy, and I probably will. I'm just going to take a break because it was quite intense, and I have a lot more other books on my physical TBR that I would like to get through before going and getting more 500-page books from the library. I posted this on my Instagram story and everyone in my DMs responded saying, have you read A Man Called Ove, or is it A Man Named Ove? And everyone said it was incredible. So to be honest, I think because that's a standalone, I'll probably read A Man Named Ove before I read the rest of the Beartown trilogy, but would really recommend it. If you just want a gripping read, go for it. My next book was a digital read, and it was Court of Dreams by C.N. Crawford. This is the Institute of the Shadow Fae book 4. I read the previous 3 in January, and this is a fantasy romance. Should have read these all at the same time, so the synopsis is going to feel a bit disjointed for you, I think. So Ariana has been exiled from the Institute, and all of the knights that are part of the Institute are dying of the Black Plague. I'm laughing because the Black Plague sounds so random when you haven't read the last 3 other books. They also blame Ariana for the Black Plague. Ariana invades the Institute to get a message to Ruadan. It's nearly seagull season. Can you hear them all outside? They start nesting on the roofs near my house about like March, May, April, so that's going to be fun. So to be completely honest, I read the first 3 of these books when I was on holiday in January, and they filled the void a little bit, you know, this like fantasy romance smut void. I didn't feel that invested in book 4, but I felt like I had to see it through and finish it, mainly because I wanted to see how it ended. But I haven't really learnt my lesson with doing this with fantasy romance books. Like, I've read a lot of C.N. Crawford's books before and I kind of know what I get with them. It gets to the finishing line and I never care that much. I always think books 1 and 2 because they're like hot, sexy and fun, and then I'm just like, oh, I can't be arsed. I don't know if it's because I read the first 3 books together, but I feel like they go from intense succubus, incubus, sexual chemistry vibes to literally straight away, we're going to be together forever, and it just was a bit like meh to me. And the ending felt a bit abrupt, but I think that's just because it was wrapped up in 4 books. I think it probably didn't need to be longer, but I was just reading it, the book was just happening to me and it was plodding along. It seemed abrupt, and when it seems abrupt I just become a bit less engaged. Overall, I really don't have much to say about this book. It was a very standard urban fantasy. Like I said, I've read a lot of C.N. Crawford's books before, so I always know what I'm signing up for. I always know what I get. I shouldn't be surprised when I get what I get. They're very formulaic and they work. You might love them if you only read fantasy romance, especially like Kindle unlimited fantasy romance, but I think if you're like a high fantasy person, you just might not enjoy them. I feel very mean saying this, and it's not intended to be mean, but this is just exactly the kind of book that I will download in a year's time on Kindle Unlimited and only realise like into chapter 2 that I've read it before, because it just doesn't really stick with me. I don't know why I keep reading cheap fantasy romance books. It's just a side effect, isn't it, of loving romance and fantasy. On to another physical book. I read Loathe to Love You by Ali Hazelwood. Now this is quite clearly a romance. This is a book I bought at 66 Books. I bought this in November, maybe? This is 3 novellas featuring 3 different engineers, a STEMinist novella collection, an environmental engineer, a NASA aerospace scientist, and a civil engineer. And this might be obvious, but all of the novellas start out with them hating their counterparts. So I've actually never read any Ali Hazelwood. This was my first Ali Hazelwood book. I was in the mood to read something entirely unserious. I wanted romance, I wanted love, I wanted sex. Don't we all? And that's what I got, and I'm entirely pleased because she did not fail to deliver on that front. So I've heard that Ali Hazelwood has a very typical formula, and I can confirm she does, and it works every time. I haven't read The Love Hypothesis. I probably would be tempted to, but obviously these are just 3 separate novellas, so I kind of got the formulaic element there with her. So one thing I really noticed from these 3 books is she loves to mess with the timeline. I don't know if she's done this in her other books, but she's always jumping from 3 years to present day to 2 weeks later. Like, it's at the start of every single chapter. She loves messing with the timeline. I don't know if that's because it's easy to mess with the timeline timeline in a novella so you can get more like context in. Like, my favourite man from these was Eric from Stuck With You. Like, that's my kind of book boyfriend, although I think he's blonde and I don't like a blonde man. The only exception is Jax Teller from Sons of Anarchy. But do you know what I will say, actually? I don't mind a blonde man book boyfriend when it's like tall, Scandi Danish, because I quite liked what's his name, Mars from Pucking Around. Even though I hate that book with all of my heart and soul, I had a soft spot for Mars. The book would have just been like so much better if they'd have just had it about Mars. As long as he's built like Thor, that's fine, but just like, if he's just like blonde for blonde's sake, I'm not interested. And although Eric from Stuck With You was my favourite book boyfriend, I felt Stuck With You was very much the case of, if they'd have just communicated better, there wouldn't have been a story. I saw something on TikTok and I'd never heard of it before. I'm sure other people have, and it was called The Idiot Plot, and it's basically the plot is caused by the two main characters being idiots, and it could be resolved if they weren't being idiots. Unfortunately, I think that's the basis for a lot of romance books, but yeah, I liked this book. It was a good, fun, easy, sexy read. I will say Miss Ali is good at writing a sex scene. I do like it when a man slurs his words because he's so horny. Although I have noticed I really pick up when authors repeatedly use the same phrases, because slurring is one of them that she says quite a lot. I don't know if it's a pattern recognition thing, but I always notice it. Not even with just her, but with like other authors. They all have like these key phrases that they use. Slurs is the least offensive one because I see a lot of them that I like. I do wish you changed the order of them, because book 2 and 3 felt really, really similar and book 1 felt more fleshed out. But yeah, otherwise would recommend. Still high off my easy and unserious Ali Hazelwood read, my next book was a digital book, and it was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Now, this is a fantasy romance, and it is her first fantasy romance. It was only a matter of time. So relations between wares and vampires with a Y, are very, very strained. So what would fix this? A marriage of politics. So the daughter of a powerful vampire councilman, Misery Lark, marries the alpha wolf in an arranged marriage. His name is Lo, and he is the most powerful alpha were in existence. You can tell I'm on an Ali Hazelwood kick, right? The first thing that I actually saw another creator point out, and I noticed it when I read the book, hardcore edgy vampire Misery Lark and her twin brother Owen. His name is Owen and she's called Misery Lark. That's fucking hardcore, and he's called Owen. And they're twins. They could have at least called them something a bit more fucking hardcore. Anyway, yeah, it just really tickled me. Like, it's so cool and vampiric, but everyone else in the book has just like regular names, like Anna. This is my first kind of foray into like any Omegaverse or werewolf fiction. Still don't really understand the Omegaverse. I did some research after reading it. Don't really understand what I've gotten myself into here, and I'm like laughing about this. The book is, to me, good bad. I do feel like my entire reading style at this point is good bad. Like, objectively, I enjoyed it. Did I like some scenes? Yes. Was I a bit like, or whatever at some scenes? Yes. I actually really liked Misery. I thought she was funny. I liked her internal monologue. There is a lot of romance books, especially a lot of fantasy romance books, where I don't really enjoy the female main character. I just like don't connect to her. I don't love her. I really liked her, which I was really surprised as like a standalone novel that I did. Her and Anna's relationship was really heartwarming. It was really nice to have a fantasy romance where there's like emphasis on another relationship besides the romantic one, and it's quite like, oh, it's like nice. I'm not gonna lie, as my first Omegaverse book, I feel like I can't even say it. So I knew this was a concept, and I knew that this was like part of these kinds of books, but the knotting thing like really stressed me out. This is not the first like supernatural species book I've read, but this is the first book I've read where there's like a heavy emphasis on knotting. call me tame, because I know I read a lot of smart and like have read a lot of dark romance previously, but it was just a bit much for me. I found it like a little bit cringe, but like who am I to say that notting is cringe? If that doesn't resonate with you, I'm not judging it. It wasn't for me. I'm laughing because it made me shy to talk about it. So I will say a criticism of the book is that I thought the pacing was weird. The last like chunk of the book, the final act, it felt really rushed. It felt like it was resolved too quickly. I know it was supposed to be a standalone book, but I felt like it could have been paced better and either made longer or split into 2 books. I don't think 2 books is what we needed, but I just felt like it wrapped up too quickly. There was a bit of like a 3rd act breakup, which you know I all hate, but like overall, yeah, fair play, Ali. It's quite good. Now, my last book of the month was an audiobook. It was a bit of a random one actually. I'm trying to always have an audiobook on the go now. I'm still struggling to kind of figure out which kinds of audiobooks it is that I like. So my 6th and final book was Good Material by Dolly Alderton, and it's a fiction book, and Andy is struggling to process the end of his relationship with the woman of his dreams, the only woman he's ever loved. He's mid-30s, he's living out of a suitcase in his best friend's house, waiting for his career as a stand-up comedian to take off. I loved this book. I love Dolly Alderton. Her writing is just, it's so British in the way that it's like so relatable. The breakup cycle was so obvious at points that it was like cringe to listen to, but that's what made it so good. Like, it felt so honest. Dolly is so good at writing about 2 things, and one of them is growing up and being in your like 30s, early 30s, just before you hit 30, and the kind of emotions and feelings that come with that, and then also at writing about love, any kind of love, friendships, romantic, familial. So those were like meshed together perfectly. So I listened to it, which for once I actually think really added to the experience of it. The narrator was chosen really well. He was really good. Even though it was about a breakup and I'm in a really long-term relationship, it really struck a chord with me. So I think if you were listening to this and you were going through a breakup, it would kind of aid in the healing, because it's funny at some points, it's really sad at some points. Like, some areas I was literally laughing out loud, and others I was just cringing because it was so embarrassing, and other times I almost cried because it just felt like it was too on the nose. You end up having this weird alliance with Andy and almost this kind of dislike for Jen, which was really interesting to me because I normally never dislike the female protagonist in the book, especially from a breakup, because I have this kind of like, oh well, you know, he must have done something wrong. Like, it's that weird tilt feeling. About 3/4 of the way through the book, I just feel like my perspective changed, and it was really, really refreshing. I really loved both the characters. I loved all the characters. I just thought it was fantastic, and I would really, really, really recommend you read or listen to it. I would quite like to buy the physical book and have the experience of reading the physical book, and I really like Dolly Alderton, so I probably will when my book buying ban is up. That was all the books I read in February. Let me know what you think. A little bit of a mixed bag, and I'm really pleased with myself for reading 3 physical books off my TBR. For those of you that don't know, I'm actually on a book buying ban for at least 6 months of 2024. Hopefully I can make it the whole year. So we're prioritising getting through my physical TBR. There is a video for that. I'll pop a link in the description box. And library books, just in an effort to reduce my own bookish consumption. I've gotten too many physical books and I'm not making any headway on reading them. And also I don't have the space for any of the books that I have. So yeah. So you should get a couple of DMs asking about Goodreads. I don't have a Goodreads, I'm afraid. I don't really like Goodreads, but I do have a Storygraph. So I'll pop the link of that below as well. You can add me as a friend on there and you can keep up to date with what I'm reading. I do also post what I'm reading on Instagram on my stories. So I have a books highlight over there. It doesn't always include audiobooks, but you can follow me on there if you like. Let me know what you thought of today's video, if you read any of the books, if you've got any recommendations for me, because I always get good recommendations from all of you. I upload Wednesdays and Sundays. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.